Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thank you for tuning into my conversations at the intersection of arts, culture, and community. Today, I am super excited. I am thrilled to welcome my next guest. With a career spanning creativity and innovation, my guest has made significant contributions as a pioneering producer, writer, director, and internet entrepreneur. My guest is the visionary behind iconic projects like Night Flight and the author of Identify Yourself. Please welcome my next guest, Stuart S. Shapiro. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, and thanks, really. It's special for me to be part of such an eclectic artistic group. Frankly, I'm honored and flattered. Really, not your normal path of creativity here, and it's appealing to me, in a strange way.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when I came across you, we were chatting a little bit just to kind of set the stage. When I came across your work, specifically it was like Night Flight or what have you. And we're definitely going to go into like the actual questions, but I want to have this as like a precursor, I suppose. My partner became aware of it, right? She was like, I remember watching this back in the day. And I was like, what is this? And she was like, you need to watch this. You need to get this playlist. You need to do all of this. And she was like, this is eclectic. This is so New York. It's all of these different things she was describing it as. And I was just like, I need to check this out. So I started checking it out. And I was like, this is amazing. This is like everything that like I aspire to do with this, with this podcast. And just, I just shot that shot one day. I think I was on LinkedIn. And, I was kind of like, you ever watch those movies when they have like the detective and he has the strings everywhere? It's like these things are connected here and there. And I was just like, who's the dude that runs this? Who's the dude that came? Who's the thought leader behind this? And then I saw your name pop up and I was like, I'm going to reach out. I'm going to shoot the shot. And literally since I first became aware that you were on LinkedIn, we got Night Flight like queued up. I've just kind of been diving in. It's literally been that, and super excited, a little nervous, but super excited to be able to chat with you on this podcast. So it's as simple as that for me, and trying to like reach out to you. And again, thank you for accepting the invitation.
Yeah, for sure. What are you drinking there? It looks like some kind of wild purple, blue.
It's a protein drink, actually. I just keep the protein in all day.
All right, shoot. So you want me to introduce myself to start off with, right? Is like the where do I start, right?
Yeah, because it's one of those things, right, where I do these interviews with people all the time. And it's a lot of times it's like artists. A lot of times it's like they have someone that's wrote it for them and then they haven't updated it in multiple years. So it's like I have the online thing, which is great, but I like to hear it from the guests themselves. Like, could you like give us, a bit of an introduction and, some of the insights behind your work, please?
Okay, so I go by Stuart S. Shapiro. My full name is Stuart Samuel Shapiro, so I'm a triple S, which is got its own course of magic in it as well. And there was a handful of other Stuarts, and so what I use the S. It's sort of like my signature or my creative signature, so to speak. I was born and raised in North Adams, Massachusetts, which is in the Berkshires in the far western part of Massachusetts. Kind of famous and well known now as for Mass Mocha, which was the converted factories from Sprague Electric in the old days, which when I grew up in. I grew up in an old-fashioned Orthodox Jewish family in North Adams. I grew up kosher. My father was in the scrap business, scrap metals, scrap papers. My father, was Crane Paper. Is kind of famous down in Dalton, Mass. They're the ones that make the paper for dollar bills. So the paper for dollar bills has to be pure rags, and my dad was one of the main suppliers of rags. So I grew up. This is a precursor to creativity. All right. So I grew up knowing that what other people threw away had value, and I could pretty much always make a living by peddling junk in the street. And I could collect junk that was worth nothing to other people and sell it to my dad and make, which I did every summer all the way through high school and half of the way through college until I got completely fucked up with drugs. Or travel and everything else. Not fucked up with drugs, but whatever. So I grew up in that area, and you want to say, where did the story start, which was one of your questions, and I thought about it. And the story really started at two places in the Berkshires, one called Tanglewood, which is the summer residence for the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and another place called the Berkshire Music Barn, which was just down the street. So those are down in Lenox, Mass, in the southern part of Berkshires. So when I was young, really young, and I don't know how often, but maybe 10, 11, I was an usher in the afternoons at Tanglewood. And in those days, Arthur Fiedler and Leonard Bernstein were part of the conductors. And, and I had to wear a, white little thing, and my brother would drop me off and I would, hang out there. So that was part one. And part two was down the road was the Berkshire Music Barn. And the Berkshire Music Barn was originally the summer residence in the 50s, started by MJQ, the Modern Jazz Quartet. But they had a tent, and I was also an usher there as a kid. And that was, Dave Brubeck, Ornette Coleman, all of the greats of the jazz. So I was born in 1948. I'm 75. I'm going to be 76 this month coming up. And you got to think like, all right, maybe I was born in 48, in the late 50s, maybe 58. I was starting to go there, 10 years old. So this kind of story started there in a way, influence of music from classical to jazz, way before rock and roll. I mean, or, Chuck Berry didn't really come to, around till the 80s and in the Berkshires and Tanglewood. But I was always fascinated by the show. And in particular, I have an early age. I wanted to be, I guess what you would call in the old days an entrepreneur, which is, sort of changed today because it's a tech thing now. But in the old days, an entrepreneur was maybe, someone that put on concerts or venues or that kind of a producer. And that was sort of formational bloodline, so people always ask me, what my bloodline is. My bloodline really is music. Because if you look at all the media and everything I've ever done, I always feel like the baseline has always been music, no matter what kind of media that I've played in. And I kind of think I always wanted to be the person I grew up. I've gone through stages of growing up and still trying to figure out if I can get rid of some of my excessive aspects. I don't know if you know the expression moon in public. I don't know if that's something that it's probably beyond your. Mooning in public is when you would take your pants down and stick your ass out the window of a car going by, right? Like, as rude as you could get in the like 50s, 60s. They're called mooning. It's funny,
Okay.
right? Like, okay, I'm showing my age, right? So I always felt like as a creative producer, I liked the moon in public. I liked that and sort of come up with content that was embarrassing or that was always just naturally cutting edge. And it had nothing to do, you think I wasn't like Arthur Fiedler and Leonard Bernstein over here. Although if you watch Leonard Bernstein, if you watch that documentary or the movie, he was pretty rude in his own lifestyle. Anyway, so
Yeah.
the beginning of, the beginning of the beginning. And, and then I went on to the actual career beginning started in 1970. So I graduated from college in 1970, which Vietnam War, I got a good number. I didn't get drafted. I was in Europe the year before. I took my junior year in France the year before. I was actually in Prague when the Russians invaded Prague in 1968. I was in France during the 68 demonstrations. And what happened was the Berkshire Music Barn had gone dormant and closed and was out of business for many, many years. So my first venture was going to the two guys that bought that land, and they had bought it originally. They were going to turn it, which they eventually did do, into condominiums. It was a beautiful property. And I went to them and said, let me lease it. I want to start the Berkshire Music Barn again. So that was a year after Woodstock. Um, and I built an outdoor stage and at there, and on I think, July 1st or whatever second, opened up with Arlo, Guthrie, Paul Butterfield, Delaney and Bonnie, Ike and Tina Turner, B.B. King, and ended with James Taylor for the summer. And along the way, I mean, there's like more stories than you can fit into this podcast alone, and just the Berkshire Music Barn, which one of them is in my book. But my favorite story was Ike and Tina Turner. Now, listen, I'm a kid. I'm 21 years old. I'm like a white boy from North Adams. Dig it, And so I had always a rain karma, and everything I ever did, every festival, every concert, whatever I ever did, it was rain. And everything always rained. And it turned out the Berkshire Music Barn that summer, there was a lot of rain. And it actually, as successful as it was financially a disaster until James Taylor, and then that was good. But for me, it was and I was also over my head. So it was raining, and Ike and Tina Turner played a short set. And that couldn't have been more than 25 minutes, right? And we're backstage, and in those days, it's like a $5,000 performance fee, maybe $3,500 for them. You paid half up front, then you had a cashier's check for when they finished the concert at the end. Sure. And my brother Eddie, who's passed away this past year, 7 years older than I am. He was just in law school or whatever. It was a big deal. I was like the kid and everyone. So he's back. So we're back in the green room. We're backwards ever. Eddie's holding this check and like trying to be fucking lawyer or whatever. He goes, we're not going to pay you the second amount of this thing. And it's sort of like if it happened yesterday, I would remember. In a flash, Ike pulled a check out of Eddie's hand, pulled out a switchblade, and said, you white motherfucker, you think you're going to get away without paying me? Like, no way. And like, at that moment, I realized I was in the wrong business. It's like, I gotta find a business where there's, Jews, and if it rains, I make money. And this concert thing is not going to fit for me too good because I'm not a tough guy. I'm not like, I can't like, because if you think about the old guys in the concert business, they had a different set of balls. But anyways, that's the kind of the beginning of the arc.
Thank you. That's really it's really funny. Thank you for sharing that. It reminds me of one of those moments. I want to get into doing sort of production, like podcasting is the lane I've been in. I've been doing this for about 15 years. And I tried to get into doing like producing and things of that nature. And I had a situation where I was, I guess, funding and helping to produce an event. I was the person funding now. And it was a jazz event like locally. And it was just bringing a group up here. And when you mentioned paying up front, I was like, note to self, sort of that piece and then the other piece on the back end. And I just remember the person that ran the venue, he got real snippy with me. And I was like, this is not, just from a personality standpoint, this is not how I go about things. And I'm 6'4" and like 280 pounds. So I can be very intimidating if I need to be. But I was like, I don't like this. I don't like this setup, this performance, and here's money. Not for me.
Right.
So
right.
realizing sort of which version of it was more for me. What do I enjoy about it? And I was like, I guess the stage is interesting, but I suppose like I like to see something happen. I like to see sort of things that are, I guess, associated with my taste and my interests, bring together community, bring together people. My eclectic taste bring together people. Yeah.
Okay, so that goes right to the heart of what your show and what your life is all about, which is creativity. And how does creativity express itself, self-express itself. If you're, what's your arc, your personal arc in life. And you sort of touched upon it. The obvious thing here is you have to find the center of who you are and enjoy it and delve into that, and also understand what the limitations of your personality is. Because being creative has, so many parts. Like you know, um, for me, creativity was always equal to materialization. So I used to like to say that a producer is an alchemist. You really have to, you start with an idea and you actually have to make that, you have to materialize. Actually, if you think about the French word of director, it's called a realizateur, someone that realizes something, not directs something, which is, more appropriate of a director, and where the French language expresses it, because you have to make a realization of concept, not just tell someone, go here, go there, the concept of realization. From my perspective, I always, my scale of accomplishment was making something. So like you're doing podcasts, you do a podcast, you finish it, man, you made a podcast, move on. You're actually making something, you can, print it, it's there. So, but I grew up in an analog world. But all along, no matter what it is, you make a record, you make a video, you make a concert, you make something. You got to make something. And also part of the creative pitfalls is when you're stuck with something that you can't finish. Or, and also as a creative person, you got to have your balls going. So there's always 10 projects out of, that don't get finished. But the worst thing is to actually be in a project and it doesn't get finished. That's sort of like having, dust in your bed. You gotta finish your projects. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to finish the ones that are in development. But once you commit to making something, you got to go all the way, and it may take forever to do it. And sometimes it's a very, very long road. That's a crazy road. But I find that it's sort of like holding a hot rock in your hand. If you don't finish, your projects, somehow it burns a hole in you somehow.
So I want to ask a little bit about sort of like, sense of humor, because like I am looking over the background and obviously music is in there. I see comedy in there and I see sort of this overarching entertainment media. But I want to speak on like humor. Like one of the tactics that I use, they talk about when someone is nervous, they tell the truth. When I'm nervous, I leave with a bit. I go with jokes. So how important for you as a creative person, as an entrepreneur, how important for you in this sort of journey of yours, how important has us having a good sense of humor been?
Okay, so I know you said good sense of humor. I don't really see it as a good sense of humor. I say it's like, why comedy? And why, as a producer that has a choice to do anything, I was part of distributing Faces of Death. Like, okay, I got the arc of humor to fucking madness. But the thing that's
Yes.
wonderful about humor, funny, and I was thinking about it, when I was a film distributor, we used to have, and I used to use the expression all the time, funny is money. Funny is money. Um, and when you work on projects, you have, the editing and the assembling and the manufacturing, and there's a lot of minutia and everything, and you go over and there's a repetition of stuff over and over and over again. And when you're working on something that's funny, it instills funniness because you have to deal with stuff all the time, and then I noticed one of the great parts of that I noticed was my first film that I ever was part of, and I sort of was the executive producer, but I don't have a specific credit on it, was Tunnel Vision. That was my first film in 1976. And it was a Neil Israel film. It had Chevy Chase in it, and Howard Hessman, and Lorraine Newman. It was the early cast of the first year of Saturday Night Live, and Neil actually shot the segments downstairs in the basement of CBS. And I remember once we finished the film and we were screening the film, that the audience actually laughed on frame. You could actually count the frame that emitted the audience response. Now, the same thing can be true for uh, horror. People scream.
Yeah.
You are in a movie and you see, frame by frame. With the reactions are very, very decimal driven. So if you can make people laugh, I think there's a karmic uh, ingestion that happens. Entertainment karmic energy. Even we put in the word quantum karmic energy has a loop to it.
True.
You're in a loop of everything that you do and breathe and you are. But if as a purveyor of entertainment and content, you're in that loop separately. What you make, you send out. What it sends out comes back. And even if you're not part of it, it's part of it. So to be lucky enough to make people laugh, I think is like I think it's good karma. As much as I've had my handful of horror films, but I never made really any horror films, but I distributed a handful of them. Comedy, I could never do enough comedy. And like you think about Comedy's Dirtiest Dozen that I shot in 19, I think 89. I think it was 89. I mean, I still watch some of the segments and they still make me laugh over and over again. So, there's like a good joke that still
Yeah.
makes you laugh if you heard it 20 times. So that's, I don't know if it works the same. I don't know if you get scared at the same time or, I mean, every guess you see Rosemary's Baby and every time the head turns, it's pretty freaky. But
Yeah.
a good joke really has longevity to it.
No, I agree with that note there where, I listen to a lot of stand-up records. I watch a lot of comedy, watch a lot of horror as well. And I find like the reaction, the laughter, what have you, or wow, okay, that was really funny. Or I go back and go through old jokes. And for me, one of the love languages or one of the signs of you really like someone is when you share like, this is one of my favorite jokes. This is one of my favorite bits. You share that with someone, it's something there. And I find like there are certain things that are nerving for me, that are horror or something to that degree. And they don't hit the same way as that first time. That first time, like when I think of The Ring, for instance, when the girl comes out of the television, I remember being in the theater with a bunch of different people. I was like, oh no, this is freaky. But when I see it subsequently, I had to have a lot of time removed from it,
Hmm.
kind of get even close to that initial response. It's more of a shock thing. Whereas for comedy, I still kind of laugh at the same jokes. I still pull up, oh, got John Mulaney here. I'm going to laugh at this. This is going to be great, or
Yeah.
what have you. I just listen to that on loop almost.
Well, the Chinese believe that laughter extends your life, that laughter is healthy. So, and I don't know what kind of scientific nature, but I would assume it's true. If you can, I mean, people that are depressed, it's easier to die early and be fucked up. But if you're laughing all the time, it's a better life, no matter what.
I agree. I try not to take too many things serious. And again,
Well, especially
is
today.
that
I don't know. It's really hard today, man. I don't know. Politically, it's really, really, really complicated. I wish there could be some more humor. I was happy to see Biden make some fun the other day. That was worth it. Go ahead. Next
yeah.
one.
Yeah, and just the thing about it, like, you know, when I'm doing this, it's a skill, like, and trying to sort of find the spot where this kind of lives and trying to get it over, and have folks come on and having sort of the cycle of potentially rejection of like, I'm not going to do this pod, or this is stupid, or this is a waste of time. There's a sort of thing that's there, of like, man, rejection, or this creative thing that I do, it can lead to some form of rejection or even lack of acceptance in the way that one wants to be accepted. And the way that I kind of combat it is I just turn the whole thing into a bit. Like I'm on billboards and stuff here in Baltimore where I'm based, and people see me in the street. They're like, oh, Rob, hey, how's it going, man? And I'm like, H-list celebrity here, Rob Lee. I just take myself down a different letter. getting closer to Z, because I don't take it serious. That's the only way I can, not take myself serious or take what I'm doing serious, to just when those moments come, when that shot to the ego or that shot to what I do creatively and what I love creatively takes a hit, I don't feel as like hurt and harmed by it, I
Mm.
suppose.
Well, you know, I wrote this book, Identify Yourself, which really
Yeah.
thematically, a lot of it was really about rejection, creative rejection, and what is the part of the workflow in your life that represents. And as an independent artist or an independent producer, or any kind of area where you're making something and it requires a commercial concept to it at the other side, you're basically living with rejection your whole life. And
Hmm.
um, I lived through rejection and disappointment, and I've had I talk about how you could make a movie and it could be a big hit financially, potentially, and everybody says it's a piece of shit. So, you're making money and it's a piece of shit, you still feel like terrible. Or you have a creative movie, everybody, God, this is fantastic. Nobody shows up. And at the end of the rainbow, there is always complication, rejection, disappointment for the most part. So what I learned along the way and what I was trying to do in the book is give this sort of sense of courage to anyone that wanted to have the courage to read my book or know about it, to understand that the process, the creative process, that's what's important. Nothing else is important. It's what you do when you wake up in the morning. It's what you do for the day. It's how are you? What kind of person are you? What did you make that day? What did you accomplish that day? And it's like, my wife was a book master, and she's a book publisher, and now she's doing printmaking on her own, and she does a great piece, and goes to a gallery and nothing sells. You're like, oh, you want your stuff to sell, but that's not why you made it. You know what I mean? You make things because they're the manufacturing process of your creative energy. That's the focus of your life. And what happens to them afterwards, they're they never really, please you in a way, in a lot of ways. I mean, I used to say, to make a movie, you always see the edits that were wrong. You always see the out of focus pull. You always see something that you kind of should have compromised on and whatever. I um I made I know this goes all the way to the end of your question here, but I'll segue into it because one of my more infamous films was called Mondo, New York, which I just re-released in Blu-ray 4K after 25 years, almost 30 years, and it was never on DVD. And I mean, I'll segue back to it somewhat, but what was interesting in it, it was a very I pushed that's the film that I pushed the farthest of anything that I had ever done. And even though New Wave Theater was really not my own production, and that was still, really from a punk new wave, there's still, Dead Kennedys and, all of the bands in there are still like, as can possibly be here 40 years later. Mondo, New York is a capsule. I purposely went out to try to push the concept of what is art and try to push that limit to the extreme, right? And one of the artists in it, Phoebe Legere, great, sexy woman. Um, I put the DVD out, and she hadn't talked to me in a long time, and I knew she was mad at me from day one because we shot. She was always had a kind of a very raw sexual performance, and the cameraman shot her breathing on the floor with crotch shots and stuff, which was very Mondo. And I was always had the attitude like, come on, get over it. That's your act. Come on, give me a break. You were playing for the cameras. So she got a hold of me, and she said, you licensed my song, but actually the license is over, and I don't want to be a problem, but I never thought you were honest and fair about what you shot on that segment. And it hurt my career because it was way too sexy, and you had crotch shots and pussy hairs, and I think that, you were abusive to me as an artist. Well, for most of my life, I would have said, hey, man, I love you, but dig it. You did that in front of the camera. You knew where the cameras was, and I kind of had that attitude about everybody, for the most part, artists, like, hey, this is it. But I realized that I was actually harming somebody. I'm 75, she's older, and I said to her, like, right on the phone, I said, Phoebe, okay, I'm going to re-edit the movie. I can't re-edit the DVD. It's not on the DVD, but I'm going to re-edit the digital version.
Yeah.
And not only will I re-edit it, I'll re-edit it and send it to you, and you approve it. You're right. I
Yeah.
was a punk. And but I'm not going to say I was wrong, but I'm going to say I can correct a wrong because I harmed a person
Yeah.
that's an artist. And I wasn't that person for most of my life. Now, I think that's something to reflect on, because I think your arc as a younger person in life, you tend to have a much more fuck you attitude to everybody, like, I'm going to do it my way. And if you sign up for it, tough tookus, you don't get final edit.
Yeah.
But I think that there's, looking back, would I have done it differently? Probably.
Yeah.
Had been today the person that I was then. But then maybe I wouldn't have made that movie. I mean, I had Joe Coleman bit the heads off of two little baby mice. And he was arrested from that performance, and I got rat parts in the mail for 2 years. Um, so, I've had my share of being on the wrong side of ethical movements
Sure.
by being a punk on that level. But I don't know. I just digressed it into it. I don't know where I went on it, but I'm not sure if I got an end to it.
See, that's the good thing. I like to, like, sometimes you got to just let people cook because you've answered three questions that I have. So it's fantastic. Um, and look, like I said, I'm just feel so fortunate in doing this, having this conversation with you, because gives me a little juice, well, a lot of juice actually, and courage to kind of stay the course in what I'm doing, and pushing sort of those boundaries. So in looking back at, and let's dive a little bit further into your book. So, you know, I see the, sort of revisiting moments was a question that I added. Um, just why is it for folks that are listening, why is it important to have those moments of rejection, and how to really, sort of handle them, to sort of to take those in? And I'll add this sort of context there. A couple years ago, I got like best podcast in Baltimore, and I had I had, some folks like, man, that's great, man, that's wonderful, and I was like, this feels good, this is great. And then other folks, kind of what you were describing with the film, and I had one buddy who I really look up to. He was like, don't get too high on it, don't get too low on it. He's like, the reality is somewhere in the middle. And that's the
Mhm.
one that stuck out more to me than anything else. So how important is it from your viewpoint to have rejection within the process? Like, folks have all of these wins, and when they come up against any degree of adversity, it's just, I don't know, I don't have it.
Okay. So let me try to split rejection into two primary components:
Sure.
self-rejection and external rejection.
Mm.
As an artist, I think self-rejection is absolutely essential to becoming anywhere good, and for sure great. My first wife, Stella, was Jimi Hendrix's protege. And her husband at the time, Alan Douglas, went on to be Jimmy's producer later on in the stages. But Stella always said to me, every time Jimmy walked off stage, he was always critical. Oh, I fucked up this thing. Oh, I couldn't believe that. And we always laughed about, the greater the artist, the more self-critical they are. And so you have to have self-critical components to your artistry, because otherwise you have no art to become great. Otherwise, you're just a mediocre person. As a matter of fact, the most mediocre musicians we probably have ever known were never self-critical. We always laugh about it. Oh, he thinks everything is fucking great. Like, no, it's not. You're terrible. But so internal self-criticism, internal self constant sense of forcing yourself to push. You said at the beginning, be nervous. You got to be nervous. You got to be nervous. Otherwise, you're mediocre. And mediocrity is like, okay, just die. Like, what the fuck? So that's that part. And that's the most important part. The second part, of course, is the outside world. And the outside world is always critical. Everybody's critical. And the lamer they are, the more critical they are. And then there's, on the third party, then there's, really genuine critical people who can delve into your work and be really finite and intellectually aspiring to criticize something in the right way, whether you agree or do not agree. And those are great moments. But then if that's not rejection. Rejection is, I think, something that you process internally. I mean, somebody could say something to you that's rejection, but you don't necessarily have to internalize it as rejection. You can just say, I'm a bamboo, man. It's like water off the bamboo. I'm sorry. It's like, okay, I'm moving on. But the other aspect is rejection, I think, is fuel. I think it's creative fuel. I really do. I think it's logs on the fire. And I think that in the end, rejection, pain, suffering, even in the face of beauty, does create a more, I don't want to say more finite art, but I think it's it's fuel for the creative process. So I think it's yin and yang, man. It's like you got to have the yin and yang. And if you're a creative person, you're just generally going to be rejected. You got it, but it's hard though. I mean, it depends on what degree of self-confidence you may have or what you're surrounded with. You have a good family, does the family make up for you being, punked outside? There's a lot of different components to it, but as an artist, there's no way out.
When I go through, thank you so much. When I go through and I do these interviews, I remember I was commiserating in an interview with another podcaster, and he was talking about how he wasn't getting any love, any acknowledgement in the hometown, but as soon as he got some acknowledgement and then won several awards in New York, suddenly everyone comes back and he's like, oh, I'm on a revenge tour right now. He's like, I pull out the old emails. He's like, I'm fueled by pettiness. And I was like, me too. And thinking about the sort of log on the fire, I think about those things where it's like I came here with this sort of intent and I wanted to do this thing with it. And, it just didn't work for whatever reason. And it was sort of like the lack of acknowledgement, the lack of sort of consideration and things of that nature boils up to a version of rejection for me. But the internal piece about it, that hits so close because I think me and I think a lot of creative folks, it's just like, I'm bad at this. I don't know what I'm doing. And then eventually, it's sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, you're getting that feedback maybe from those external factors, or you start to see progress in your work. Like, okay, this is getting easier. This is looking cooler. I like this, but it has to come from yourself. That's the one that feels much more important, I think, than the external one. When folks come to me and they'll say, hey, your podcast reminds me of this, or your questions are like this, or your style is like this. I'm like, yeah, sure. All of it and none of it. I don't know. But I try to drive home the point of what my intent is and what I'm trying to do. And I'm critiquing my own thing based off what my intent is.
Yeah. So the one other aspect that you got to counter rejection and disappointment is when you do get recognized, or when, like you sort of say. I mean, frankly, you inviting me to a podcast like this gives me a sense of recognition to myself, just the fact that, you're interested in talking to me about, what I've made or who I am, or that I'm actually, got this creative. I tell my wife every so often, I said, some people think I'm a legend, there's always a famous saying, behind every genius is a wife that's telling him he's a schmuck, it's like, um, I really, I've been very lucky lately because Night Flight, after, I started Night Flight in 1981, and it ran for 8 years on USA Network, all night long. And I had my own arc to it. I actually left Night Flight in late 86 after my son was born, and I ran away from it. But having started Night Flight Plus again, several years ago, and it being really revived and, getting really discovered, and not only discovered, but discovered by people that were, I have a lot of people that come up to me, and I get a very similar statement a lot, which is like, I grew up on Night Flight. I wouldn't be the person I am today if it wasn't for Night Flight. I know I run a record company. I would have never been in a record. It wouldn't be that. I'm an artist. Night Flight opened my world to me, that it wasn't flat. It was really round. And I've been really lucky lately to get those kind of comments from individuals in a plurality to a degree that, okay, hey man, that's really kind of cool. And the funny aspect to that story is that a lot of people that have come up to me and tell me they grew up on Night Flight were 8 years old when they watched Night Flight. And they tell me the same story. I snuck out of the room after my parents went to sleep and turned on the TV and watched it, or my big brother was smoking pot and he let me come in and watch it. And, I always laugh about it because, we never, ever, ever thought that we had uh, 8-year-olds watching Night Flight. We thought it was a pot smoking 25, 35-year-old group of people, which it was, of course, but there was a lot of young kids that, I had this one guy, he's a really, really big fan. He's the son of a really famous musician. And he tells me the story where he snuck out of the room, he tells the story. And the first video he saw in his life as an 8-year-old was The Residents video. And The Residents was, crazy, almost like a psychedelic, or people watch Liquid Sky for the first time, or, like really psychedelic stuff. And they were young, and all of a sudden the world was like completely different forever. It's like taking acid as an 8-year-old, but a video acid, in a lot of ways. So that's kind of pretty cool that I was able to actually accomplish that.
Yeah, I mean, discovering it and discovering it sort of secondhand, as I was touching on earlier. My partner is 12 years older than I am, and she's like, I remember watching this as a kid. I was like, when did you watch this? I don't know what this is. What is it? She was like, just watch along. And now it's literally, watching Night Flight Plus is on, it's on the Apple feed for us, and we're watching it regularly. I have the Spotify thing and say, oh, okay, this is this song. This is great. This is what I'm into. And
Uh-huh.
it's sort of there. And, that sort of age, like I'm 39, right? And that sort of age difference, it's one of those things where this is why we always remind each other, this is why we're together. We both are having this same sort of simpatico moment. And it's watching something like Night Flight. It's just like, oh, right, you're into that? Yeah, I am too. Like I was around when this was popping. Like I remember growing up during this time, or what have you. My partner would say, and I'm like, I have no context for this, but I'm completely in.
Yeah. So, all right. So it brings up a good point here, which I've been trying to understand and has constantly brought up. And this is the concept of nostalgia.
Yeah.
Um, and you're 39, you said? Okay. So you're 39 and you could have a sense of nostalgia for a time that you were not aware of. So I have people call me, they're 39 there's like there's a 35 to 55-year-old bulk main audience, but the 39-year-olds and the to 40 some odd year olds are nostalgia about a time I'm still not quite understanding of how that really works. But I do know that, and I use the expression, nostalgia is the best weed in town, because I think, nostalgia somehow has a serotonin kind of hit to it. And it does make you feel good, assuming, of course, that you're nostalgic about a good time. God forbid you're like nostalgic when you were abused. That's different. But most people, when they tell me nostalgia, oh, this video reminds me, or this song, I was banging this chick, or like, this. And so I'm asking, turn around and ask you, how can you be a nostalgia for a time that you were not a part of?
I think I think for me, when I watch like maybe the music videos or sort of the culture that's being covered, it's kind of get understanding the reference, understanding the sources that are in these references that I'm more familiar with, that I'm like, oh, so this is where this comes from. Let me go in here and do sort of the down the rabbit hole thing. And I'm like, I kind of wish I was here. I kind of wish I was during that time. I was one of those kids that, we used to record like television on the VHS, so we'd have the commercials, all of that stuff, trying to set the tone. And I don't know, for some reason, it's just like, I guess maybe the commercials ran longer, maybe sort of the movies were of that era were played more, but there are stuff in that sort of like 80s time period, and I was born in the mid 80s, during that 80s time period that I'm much more like nostalgic for than maybe before. Like
Mhm.
stuff that's from the 70s, I don't really have that reference point. But stuff from the 80s, maybe because
80s,
of
yeah.
where I was at, it's just like, oh, no, no, this is great. I see this DNA and this content that I am much more familiar with because that's of my era. But seeing maybe the people who made that stuff, they were probably informed by stuff from like the earlier 80s that I don't understand or I wasn't around for, but now I see it and I connect those dots and I see some truth there. That's where that nostalgia comes from for me, I suppose.
Hmm. Does it make you feel good?
Absolutely. Hell yeah. It's a great feeling and
Little
it's
bottle here, here. Go turn on Night Flight Plus, shake it up, and feel good. The Night Flight high.
it's one of those things that like, feeling like I was missing something and then being able to kind of get it and just receive it. And it's like part of, I feel upon watching an installment, I feel cultured. I feel a bit more cultured in the way that I look for it. And that's
Yeah.
that's the thing that I get out of it. I love that about it. And, you know, I think sort of there's me doing this podcast before being aware of Night Flight and me doing it like after. And I try to incorporate some of this stuff and at least the spirit that I feel is there.
Well, I'd say, that's really cultured is really, I use discovery a lot, but, culture, and it's not, I mean, it's cultured, but it's almost counterculture to a lot of degree because as, there's a lot of culture around us, but cultured, to be cultured, that's a question really. To be cultured, you should have a wider palette of what it is to be cultured. And our job, and my job has always seemed to have been, present the counterculture of culture, and present it in its glory as best as possible. And kind of uncensored in a way. When I made Comedy's Dirtiest Dozen, what made that film, I don't know if you ever watched it, but it's really, you should check out a couple of the performances on it. It's actually on Night Flight Plus. You could watch it. So I went to spend a whole year with going around the country, and the concept was to choose the 12 dirtiest comedians that were local and not known nationally, which was not hard. Fly them to New York in front of a live audience, shoot in 35 millimeter, no retakes. No retakes, one straight shot. So they had to perform their performance with no edits or anything.
Yeah.
And the tension that was created in the performance because they knew it was one live take was really made the the performance have such a liveliness to it. It wasn't like, oh, hey, start all over again. It was like, hey, man, you got 10 minutes, hone your set down and deliver it. Um, and also, like I went to, um, um, I'm not going to say Chris, not Tim, uh, Bill Hicks, sorry, Bill Hicks,
Yeah.
legendary. And I said to Bill, I said, I want you to do a set that you could get arrested for if you did it down south, that you wouldn't do live in front of an audience and down south.
Yeah.
So, whatever it is. And he did do a set that was really over the top. I loved him. He was really special, really super special.
That'll
And
be
then, of
on.
course, Chris Rock, I was born a suspect, opens up his side. I was born a suspect, you know, think about that. Chris Rock, pure. I was born a suspect.
Oh yeah.
He's
That's
like,
it's
everybody
on the
in
list.
everyone up there, they dialed 911 and waited for me to come by.
That's good. It's good. It's going to be on the list. Once I get back in town, definitely, I enjoy a good laugh and knowing that that's there. Hell yeah, that's there. That's good. That's good. Um, so I got two sort of like last real questions, and then I have a few, if you indulge me, rapid fire questions that are fun questions. They're goofy questions, but
Okay.
they're fun. But these next two I just want to hit you with. I've been kind of playing with this idea of creative fasting. Um, like I do this podcast, it's the community thing, and it's like go to this art show, go to my performance, and so on. And I had to take like a 6 months hiatus, just not going to anything, just needed to,
Mhm.
or kind of going to other places to get maybe a different perspective, getting out of my creative bubble. Is that something that you've done, like kind of getting away from sort of your creative bubble, which you would normally do, maybe to jog something loose, and maybe have a different perspective and open it up? Because there's an eclectic nature to a lot of the work that you've done over your career, so it's varying different. And the notion you said about being cultured. So, what do you think about that concept of sort of creative fasting or kind of getting out of your creative bubble?
I would say the opposite.
Sure.
Uh, I would say that it's, I'm older now, so I don't get a chance to go, to what I kind of beat myself up when we don't go out enough. We don't see enough music. We don't go downtown. We don't, you know, um, when I was young and in my prime, going out was what made it all happen all the time. You connect this, someone give you that, you see a performance of CBGBs, you see a band, you whatever, see an artist, video art. Oh, I got to have it. So, you travel in there is, you don't want to be in a bubble. And where you're in a creative bubble, hopefully it's all of New York City. I mean, New York I was lucky, to be in New York, because New York's like a big creative bubble. It really is in a lot of ways. So, um, I, I don't think I could ever. I mean, I I left Night Flight in 1986 to leave a cocaine bubble, but that wasn't a creative bubble. I had to escape the rock and roll drug world, that was just insidious at every corner and every person and everywhere. And I
Yeah.
had to run away from that. So that's a little bit different, to try to change that incestuousness that came with rock and roll and the world that we were in downtown on that level. But I say the opposite. I say, you gotta, every time you go out, there's always some influence that turns you on, whatever. There's always influences. Gotta be, it can come from all kinds of ways. So I don't know if that's your answer to it, but I say, get over it and get out.
Like it. That helps. That's good.
Well, by the way, I was just going to say one other thing was I thought you were going to say, what's my creative bubble? How do I get my creative bubble? And I was going to ask you, when I smoke pot, I'm very creative. You know, I would
that
say,
that
from a creative perspective, weed is definitely an instigator of creativity. There's like no doubt about it for me anyway.
that's that's good. Yeah, that definitely was a big part. I remember I used to listen to a lot of Kevin Smith's podcast, Smodcast, and he was talking about being a wake and bake person and wake and baker, and he was like, look, I know this is irresponsible. He was like, I love smoking weed. I'm smoking weed all day. He's like, but I have to give myself something creative and business like that I'm doing so I don't feel like a complete loser. He's like, so I'm editing a podcast, I'm editing a movie, I got a joint lit. And he was like, they come out better for some reason. It made me laugh, and I applied that to what I was doing. I was like, if I'm going to sit here and I'm going to smoke this joint, I was like, you should work on something, though.
Right. Well, it's hard to be, it's interesting. I mean, I think weed has a creativity to it, but it also can, be problematic, in terms of like focus and, being detailed, but it sure does help creativity. I mean, my wife always laughs at me when I come back and I start saying, should you smoke some pot? I say, yeah, like this idea, I think.
That's why I always have a notepad with me. I was like, look, I got to write this down. I'm not going
Yeah.
to know what it means later. Uh, so here's sort of the last real question I have for you, and I'm always curious about sort of the different phases in one's journey or what have you. Like early on, like I said, I've been podcasting for 15 years. I've been doing this particular podcast. It'll be 5 years later in the summer, and I was before I set up for this one. I was looking at questions from that first group, and I was like, "Yo, I have come a far away from some of my questions
Hmm.
initially."
Hmm.
um, and sort of being able to stretch the boundaries of who I'm talking to. Like I'm talking to a legend right now, and that's like challenging and informational and kind of getting a gauge of where I'm at as a interviewer, as a podcaster. For you within your journey, what's been the most rewarding, informational, or challenging point for you?
Two aspects to that. One is having to be able to rejoice in some of the films that I made that were, it was pretty much a documentarian for the most part. But when, you kind of try to think about, what kind of immortality your content can have, not yourself personally, but, I've had a joy knowing some of the films that I have that are in my library, that I made them and I had a chance to make them or produce them or distribute them. Um, and I, I feel, that does reward me personally. But then I go back to Night Flight and I really I'm 75. I'm pretty much sort of a working retired person, because I'm working, but I'm not like going crazy with staff and managing people and trying to build something. But I am trying to build Night Flight. But Night Flight is constantly rewarding for me. Every time Thomas, and I have a great partner, Thomas Millarney, almost your age. He's my partner. He's been, since we started Nightfall, I was really lucky. I got he's like my son. He's like, Stuart reincarnated in a way that's, and he really has got all the great sensibilities and he runs the network. So, we put out new content every single Friday and, it gets refreshed and an NFTV gets refreshed, the programming and the Horathon channel gets refreshed, and there's just like this constant flow of really cool content that's flowing. And that heartbeat and the fact that I'm so lucky to actually be at this stage of my life, because I'm on the back nine, I'm way on the back nine here, no matter what, and to be able to be rewarded by creativity, and it's got a flow to it. It's not like I got to work for a year to try to make a movie and it maybe comes out like Night Flight's alive. It's like it's a living organism. And that is food. It's like eating all the time. And I'm eating it and I'm giving it. And that is, I'm very, very lucky to be able to have somehow arrived at that point in my life where I have a, a channel that's our own. I don't have to, Thomas and I, we have to please each other, but there's two people and it's my show and, and I don't have a boss. I don't have a network trying to tell me, oh, you can't use the word fuck on your channel or you can't put this show on or, you know, dude, it's like, I guess where you would be at if you were to think that at 75 years old, you could still be doing some podcasts, you should want to do that because you should never stop doing your shit, man. And if you can do it and, hopefully make a living still with it, and it's your legacy in a way, and you're still making content until the day you die, I don't think it gets any better than that. Particularly if we're in the digital world now. So digitally really allows such a different sense of prolificness, So I'm fortunate with full gratitude. I really am. And I'm older and life like keeps me young in a lot of ways. I mean, it's almost like that laughter, you know what I mean? But there's something that's really nourishing when you get a chance as an artist to be able to make your stuff and it gets out.
It's great. And, just definitely, I'm just, just hearing so much from you that, I aspire, and I'm looking at, just, being independent here, having like freedom and having sort of that content and being able to have something that you're proud of and that's yours. That's, why I've tried to stay independent in doing this in a world where
Stay the course, man. Stay the course, Rob. Stay the course. You're doing it.
And I'll say this before I close and you go to these last few rapid fire questions, and staying and riding the wave, as I call it. I'm an Aquarius, so I'm riding the wave. That's what I call it. And, I've been able to teach. I've been an educator for like the last probably like 7 months, teaching high school kids how to podcast. And I'm going to be teaching college students during the summer.
That's really cool.
And
good for you.
It's like one of those things that I wasn't expecting to be a part of this whole arc, but it's rewarding and it's kind of counter to what the thing is. It's like, hey, you should be part of a big network and they do all of the work for you. No, I don't really know if I want to do that. I'd rather have a lot of what I find interesting in there. I want to speak to the people that I want to speak to and have the conversations that I want to have. And, if people are down for the ride and we have a shared vision, that's where the hit is at. But some of these other things that are, this is the path for you because you're a podcaster and this is the bucket we're putting you in, not really with it. So it's definitely cool and rewarding to hear. And there you have it, folks. I want to again welcome. And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Stuart S. Shapiro for coming on to the podcast and sharing a bit of his journey with us and some great insights. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.